Hello, everyone joining us from around the world today. My name is Michael Ogwike. I am from Lagos, Nigeria, and I am an MBA student here at Stanford. In Lagos, where I'm from, everyone has a side hustle. I have friends who have started all kinds of businesses, from farming to fintech, and from solar to social media influencing. I mean, that's a big thing these days with YouTube and TikTok. There is an incredible opportunity for us to continue to build our Africa. And that is why we have selected some of the legends who have actually started businesses in Africa to share with you their battle stories. We could find no better moderator to anchor this panel but the distinguished Aramide Abe, who is the mother of startups in Nigeria. Like, she literally founded a startup that takes care of other startups. It's called NaijaStartups. Please welcome Aramide to take us away.
Hi, thanks, Michael. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Thank you. It's an honor to moderate this entrepreneurship panel. So thank you to the organizing committee of the Stanford Africa Business Forum. As you know, the theme is driving growth and innovation for the next decade, and this is the entrepreneurship panel. I'm going to introduce my panelists in a short moment, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a background as we go into this. While for centuries, Africa was seen as the dark continent, it is quickly becoming a hotbed of innovation, specifically in the areas of technology and entertainment. Smart investors are taking notice. An article released in March by the Africa Business Report stated that the African startup system now has 4 unicorns, that is, companies valued at over $1 billion each, namely Fori, Interswitch, Jumia, and Flutterwave. In contrast, there are well over 240 unicorn companies in the US and over 100 in China. So for Africa, many challenges remain, but it is safe to say that the seed of innovation has been planted. It's also important to note that in many of the US and Asia cases, coveted unicorn status was rapidly attained as agile, innovative businesses reacted to new opportunities driven by necessity, such as a sudden shift in consumer behavior. And in this way, even the pandemic could serve as a global market leveler that will see even cutting-edge business models refined, as VCs are forced to choose more carefully, strategically, and sparingly where they deploy their capital. And I'm glad to have a VC on the panel with us, and I'll be asking him and other entrepreneurs some questions in relation to investment. We also cannot juxtapose the Africa unicorn status versus the US and Asia, because on a linear scale, before China really started expanding in innovation, it had years of solid industrial growth, building a firm stock of physical capital. It also had strong investments in human capital, with a broad investment in basic education and in higher education. Innovation on any spectrum is a key factor for growth and development, and today, our panel will focus on the startup and tech ecosystems and how we can drive growth and innovation for the next decade. So allow me to introduce our panelists for today. We have Iyin Aboyeji, General Partner of Future Africa and co-founder of Flutterwave and Andela. Maurizio Caio, Founder and Managing Partner, TLCom Capital. Fiona Mungai, Managing Director, Endeavor. Uche Pedro, Founder and CEO, BellaNaija. Welcome. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question around innovation. I'm going to ask E first. I'm going to ask you a question first. From your experience at very innovative companies, namely Flutterwave, who recently acquired unicorn status, Andela and Future Africa, where you are now, how have you been able to overcome the existing barriers in our African environment to ensure that innovation thrives? Would you care to share some of those challenges with us?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for having me here. Well, I mean, my mindset with respect to innovation in Africa is that the challenges are opportunities, and I think that the biggest barriers oftentimes is the mindset with which we come at the challenges that we see on the ground. When you come at it from a very defeatist point of view, where you start to feel like, because it doesn't feel like building a startup in Mountain View or Palo Alto, it's not worth it. Then very quickly, nothing can save you, right? Because the first battle is the battle of your mind. And the moment you overcome that, the other things are very easy, because the lens with which you take a look at these problems completely can change your worldview. And both at Andela and Flutterwave, we took on the biggest challenges we could find on our path. We wanted to be able to export high quality service workers from Nigeria for the technology space. And the biggest challenge was we had no talent. And so we built a business around training talent, paying talent to train talent, so that we could build that business. With Flutterwave, we wanted to be able to help merchants and people in general to be able to connect to the global economy. But then we realized they didn't use digital payments. They were still stuck on cash. And so we built a platform that made it easy for them to accept any type of payment, because we realized the biggest challenge they faced was having to deal with different digital payment types when they were just trying to get paid and move on to making profits. And then we built a system that combined 270 different payment methods to make their lives easier. And even today, Future Africa, we want to build a thriving early stage capital ecosystem. But rather than run away from the challenge, we decided that we're going to build our own infrastructure instead of begging DFIs and LPs and giving them control over our future. So we decided to go right to our people. And over a year later, we've invested over $5 million across 50 companies. If we were a fund, we would be a $50 million fund. And this time we have an opportunity to grow exponentially over the next 10 years to become a $1 billion fund, because we're not going to have to go cap in hand for 18 months before we can write checks to entrepreneurs. So the biggest opportunities are hidden in the biggest challenges. And once you have that worldview, everything else becomes a lot easier.
Thanks for that, Iyin. I love the part where you mentioned mindset, which is such a major thing for anything, and especially for doing business or even fundraising or investing in Africa. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, and I'll come back to funding when I ask you and Maurizio some questions. But you mentioned talent, right? In one of your when you spoke about some of the challenges you were addressing, and that brings me to a talent question that I'm going to address Uche with. As you know, many emphasize the importance of skills in innovation, and talent is something I know we're all passionate about as African founders. And one may say, yeah, we have a wealth of talent, but then also there is a talent problem as well. And we typically look at this as a macro issue, and perhaps in the West, one will look to governments to solve this problem. But as a business owner, we realize that we have to very quickly innovate and just take decisions on our feet. So are there other less conventional but effective ways to address this as a founder, this talent challenge? And can you share any experiences you had at BellaNaija in doing this?
Thank you very much, Aramide. So yes, talent. The truth is that a gap definitely exists. There's a gap between what is being taught in universities and the skills that the market needs, the actual on-the-job needs. But similar to Iyin, you look at this as an opportunity. So I'll take this from a couple of facets. One facet I'll take it is from sort of like the employer's perspective, especially in the startup industry. As an employer, you will have to become basically like a talent incubator, especially for your first level team members, so people coming right out of university, because whatever it is that they're learning oftentimes will not match what you need. So I'm talking about it from the lens, for example, of our industry, which is digital media. So oftentimes, yes, people have some of the foundations, but we're going to have to build up greatly from there. So a lot of on-the-job training, as well as unconventional and non-traditional training methods. So using some of the, fast rising platforms and the array of courses that are available there to upskill the team. But I'll tell you, there's something that is really, really exciting. Within the last year, we've had a crazy year worldwide, but it has also opened up so many learning opportunities and somewhat democratized it. Yes, there's still the question mark around, digital inclusion and not everybody having access to the right internet or, hardware to access these opportunities. But the truth is that these opportunities have opened up, and it gives that opportunity for people to get those skills they need. The other aspect I'll talk about is in terms of innovation and the opportunities that exist. Similar to what happened with Andela from more of like a software development perspective, there's so many other skills that are needed and are exportable and that will give young Africans access to international and, even Pan-African job opportunities, including in our industry, which is digital media. Finally, I'll talk about collaboration. So a lot of on-the-job learning is locked up in organizations. So let's say somebody's working for NaijaStartup and you're taking them through your processes and how you do things as a somewhat unique company. That needs to be unlocked. So, and that would come by collaboration. So the potential for collaboration with existing educational institutions to sort of like codify that learning in a way that is scalable, that would be really exciting. And I know that there are lots of, young entrepreneurs and MBA students on this seminar. So definitely in that space, learning, education across the continent, an opportunity exists there for you.
Thanks, Uche. That was great. It's interesting that you also mentioned this thing about opportunity, right? And it sounds like from you and E's perspective as entrepreneurs, necessity has been the mother of innovation and invention, as it were. But you also mentioned something about collaboration and partnerships, which is key, and many people fail to see that opportunity, especially as entrepreneurs, whether it's liaising with institutions, like you said, or regulators or public sector. So thank you for highlighting those. I'm going to now ask Maurizio a question around investment. As an investor with a great view of the wealth and investment landscape in Africa, where do you see the most rapid and or inspiring innovation? And what areas are you interested in?
Thank you, Aramide. I think that when you look at Africa, there is this, I believe, wrong assumption that there are some verticals that are more attractive than others. And so far, we've probably proven that fintech works really well. But that's a general rehearsal for the role of technology that we can play. I mean, the magnitude of the opportunity is massive, well beyond fintech. So my instinct is to say what areas, all of them. There's all of GDP that is waiting to be fixed through technology and that is now broken. There are gigantic markets that are underserved or served in a bad way where demand already exists and where entrepreneurs can show us where to go. So we never have a view as investors which areas are more attractive than others. We think that entrepreneurs can be more attractive than others, and they show the way. So entrepreneurs have taken us in so many different places: logistics, aggregation of retail, education, healthcare, automotive, financing, including fintech. But there's life beyond fintech, and there's the quality of the entrepreneurs is world class. The magnitude of the things that need to be done is gigantic. And the role that technology can play is very, very high. So my instinct is really not to point to a specific vertical of GDP, but to rather encourage the support of those entrepreneurs that have an ability to redesign an industry, to think through what can be done differently and take huge risk, because the high level of risk is actually not so much in technology. There's a lot of interesting technology being developed in Africa, but the real innovation is in the business model, is in the ability of the entrepreneur to rethink something that doesn't work. And that is where we need to really embrace that risk, encourage the entrepreneurs, push them beyond what they think they're capable. So my point is really to say all of it. Which parts? All of it.
Thanks, Maurizio. You know, it's amazing because I know we have a broad audience here. We have people who have businesses already in Africa, people who are looking to invest in Africa, and even potential entrepreneurs. So I love how you've mentioned, look, it's beyond fintech, right? There's life beyond fintech. There's a bunch of industries, a range. There's logistics, perhaps agriculture, finance. There's just so many industries that you can look into and refine, revise that business model. And that's where the real innovation is. So thank you, because it's very encouraging, you know, as people look into Africa and begin to ask these questions, or, you know, on the other hand, you know, there's what the media sort of shares, which makes you sometimes think that there's only one, you know, sector or vertical. So thank you for that insight, being someone who has invested very heavily in Africa. Okay, I'm going to now ask Fiona about Endeavor. Endeavor supports entrepreneurs with potential for economic and social impact in their regions. Are these mostly tech entrepreneurs, fintech entrepreneurs, and should African countries only focus on technology adoption where innovation is concerned?
Thank you so much, Aramide, and very happy to be here. And I'd just like to double click on what everybody has said. In so many problems and these present opportunities. And I'd like to anchor this on a tagline that we use at Endeavor in terms of when economies go down, entrepreneurs go up. So it's a really great time for entrepreneurs on the continent. And yes, as you mentioned, we do support, about 2,000 entrepreneurs across the world, probably about 70 on the continent, Flutterwave being one of them, and companies like Cellulant and Twiga that you may all be familiar with. Now, these entrepreneurs operate in very diverse sectors, from payments to logistics to agriculture and healthcare as well. But the underlying thread that we see across all of them is they're tech or tech-enabled. And the reason behind this is that we find if you're really going to scale and go across multiple markets, then technology is important for you to be able to do this. It allows you to make your business model a lot more agile. You can do this faster. You can roll out into multiple countries, and then also take your product global, which is really where we drive our entrepreneurs to go. So yes, there's a heavy emphasis on technology or leveraging on technology to be able to scale your product across multiple markets. However, I think there's still so much that needs to be solved at a very basic level. So even take, for example, healthcare across the continent. There are not enough hospitals to be able to serve sick people in our markets. And so something as basic as building brick and mortar, building more of these facilities, which you see some of our entrepreneurs doing, providing dialysis centers, is still in a very traditional industry, but there's need for that. We also see it across agriculture, where farming practices need to be developed a little bit more further. And yes, when you layer technology on this, it makes it a lot more exciting and interesting. But once there's a lot of focus there now in terms of where investors are focusing on, I think there still lies a lot of opportunity in the more traditional space that is solving for really basic problems.
Thanks, Fiona. And that's great. From what I hear you say, yes, there's a heavy focus on tech-enabled businesses, but there are still, fundamental challenges outside of tech, brick and mortar, like you mentioned. And I think one piece of advice would be then, address some of these challenges and perhaps layer that with technology. Obviously, it's easier to say that than in practice, in theory, but again, there are opportunities. It's about finding them. So thank you for that. I'm now going to ask a general question across the panel. Can you speak about the value of relationships in Africa and innovation, or even with scaling your business? And I'll direct that at E first, and I'll go across the panel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking me that question. I think at the end of the day, when we think about building the kind of things that we build in the kind of environments where we built them, it's primarily a business that's about people, right? And as a result, there's a need to build relationships across board if you want to do well here. First of all, there's an education process that has to happen with stakeholders like the government, and it's very important to build relationships there. And then there's other companies in your space, even those you might think you are there to disrupt. Oftentimes, you're probably playing a very different game from what they're playing, and being able to work well with them does help. There's also, talent in your space and your ability to be a breeding ground for talent. But I would say the most important relationships that birth companies are the relationship with your founders, right? Between the founders, between the people that you build businesses with. In many cases, it's so important. I've been very lucky to be able to build important relationships with co-founders that have gone on to run the business after my initial stint. And that has been super helpful for our growth, because then, one person can kind of expend themselves for the first 2-3 years trying to get things working. But then knowing fully well that there are other people who can pick up the relay race from wherever you stop. And that's the kind of relationships that builds companies. And then obviously, relationships with your investors. I am very proud that I've had the privilege of working with pretty much the same group of investors over the last 10 years. I don't think that mix of investors has changed very much. And although some hop on and hop off over time, just having that core of people who will back almost anything you do because you've been diligent in returning capital time and again is a privilege that I wish more younger people in my industry would cherish and work hard towards cementing.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Relationship with investors is the last thing you said. Uche, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about this from an Africa lens. We talk about Africa a lot, and oftentimes when we talk about Africa, maybe we're really talking about Nigeria or Ghana or things that's happening like in individual countries. So when I talk about relationships, I want to talk about how those relationships can allow us to truly grow across Africa. There are so many untapped frontiers, and I'll explain. So for example, Nigeria, we're in West Africa, we're surrounded by quite a number of francophone countries. However, when you look at the growth of startups, you would see limited, we expanded into Cote d'Ivoire, expanded into Senegal. You'll see more of, maybe like Nigeria, then South Africa, Nigeria, then even Brazil, or Nigeria, then the UK. So for us to truly start leveraging the power of being African, I would say that those relationships are really key. So for us at BellaNaija, a step that we took a couple of years ago actually prompted from the other side. So we worked with a digital company based in Francophone Africa, and that just unlocked so many amazing relationships and business opportunities for us. And even on the other side, so for example, a company called Africare, which is currently the leading fashion e-commerce company across the continent with revenues of above, I think it's about 3 million euros at this point. And it just started from a conversation. Oh, hey, we met, let's do something together. And I've even seen their growth progress through starting with some of those conversations. Hey, we're having a talk with DHL. Next thing, they're DHL's #1 clients for e-commerce in various markets. So I would say that let's challenge ourselves. We talk about Africa, we're Africans, we do business here. let us go beyond sort of the traditional relationships that have been formed and open up the new markets. I would love to see more being done with North Africa. Oftentimes, yes, there's a closer affiliation with sort of like the Middle East region from that side, but we're on the continent for a reason, and those opportunities exist. If you bring in the technology aspect, technology definitely helps squash a lot of language barriers. So with a lot that is happening in terms of, translation, technology, that could really help us as we try to grow across the continent. Thank you. I think you can go on. So maybe Fiona, go ahead, or Maurizio.
Sorry.
Let me.
Yeah, I might have missed something there for a second. But so in terms of relationships, I think it's really at the core of our model as Endeavor. We are a network of and by entrepreneurs. And we really see this in a powerful way when we bring peers together, not only across the continent, but then connect our entrepreneurs to other founders in different markets. And when they come together, say, for example, in a peer-to-peer working group, and you have one entrepreneur who's in Brazil, for example, facing a similar challenge that another entrepreneur here is facing, and they sit together and they're able to brainstorm on this. I think this is really where the magic of those relationships comes up. And also when we look at access to markets, when an entrepreneur is looking to move to Kenya, for example, to the Middle East, the first place they'll call when they get to the Middle East is a fellow entrepreneur in Endeavor, is a fellow mentor. So how should we be thinking about our market entry here? What should we do? What should we avoid doing? So I think every day, as we go about our work at Endeavor, we really see how cultivating this networks and these relationships comes alive in a very powerful way. And yeah, we are here to nurture them and to help build them in every possible way.
I'll also say a few words about relationships, and they are really a very important ingredient of success in venture. I think that there's probably two perspectives from a venture capitalist perspective. One is to encourage entrepreneurs to work together. So the entrepreneur can be very lonely. And so it's important for entrepreneurs to have opportunities to talk to each other. So we have a couple of initiatives. We have a CEO summit where all of the CEOs and founders of our companies talk together, and we bring additional CEOs as well. And we don't say anything. We don't bring experts. We just encourage them to share, because there's so much that is shared among the entrepreneurs. They all are anxious or excited about things that they think they're doing for the first time, and then they discover that there's another 20 people that is going through the same. And this is very important. Similarly, we ran an annual female entrepreneurs, because that's another element very important, even in things where we have to fight a challenge, encouraging more women entrepreneurs in Africa. We need to put them together. We need to show them models. We need to work in a way where the entrepreneur is not alone. So there's a dimension of relationship, which is encouraging dialogue and exchange of experience for entrepreneurs to learn from each other. There's another point which we, in the end, if you ask venture capitalists, we all say that we add a lot of value to the entrepreneur, right? Sometimes we get in the way, we don't add value. But we have to recognize that some of the ingredients for world-class venture capital are not yet in Africa, right? And so when we think about syndicating around, it's not very easy to syndicate a Series A or a Series B of 20 million with just African entrepreneurs. It's important to have relationships in Silicon Valley, in Israel, in other geographies to bring enough capital. When there are talent challenges, once again, when you need an intermediary, there's a very small number of high-quality intermediary. And African entrepreneurs deserve the best world-class treatment. And when that treatment is not available on the continent, you freaking get them the treatment that they deserve from other places. And you need the ability to access that. So I think that it's about really starting from what the entrepreneur needs and not what you can give them, but what they need. And sometimes you can give it to them, sometimes you can enable other relationships. But it's about entrepreneur at the center. She's the hero. All of us are at the service of the entrepreneur, and relationship is key, just like everyone else has said, to get more capital, to recruit, to make partnerships, to have access to markets, and so on and so forth. So it's really start from the entrepreneur and try to really provide assistance. The check is such a small subset, the money, of what we can do to help. A lot of the time is more about trying to have a better company next year, right? And the relationship play a gigantic role in this process.
Thanks, Maurizio. Sorry about that, guys, but I'm back. I don't know if Fiona had answered the question. If she has, I'm happy to move on. Sorry about that, but I'll definitely get the notes.
I did our meeting.
Okay. I know, I picked up some of it. I know, so from me talking about relationship with co-founders, relationship with the public sector, Uche talking about relationships with other African countries, entrepreneurs in other African countries. And as you know, with the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement now, coming up, those are important. It's important to harness those relationships or begin to build relationships that way. And she referenced just I think it must have been a cold call or a cold chat. So this is an encouragement to other entrepreneurs, in the audience, that it's not about having to know so many people in other African countries, but literally just reaching out to people, leveraging the tools we have. And then Maurizio also talks about looking at it from an entrepreneur standpoint, and then looking at all the different sort of focal points and relationships, of course, investors and all the other stakeholders within that ecosystem that would help the entrepreneur become successful. So thank you all for those points. I'm going to now ask, in theory, the further we are away from development as a continent, the more we should be able to gain from investments and adapting and adopting innovation. Yes, investments are lower in Africa than anywhere in the world, and you'll be no better person than to speak about this in terms of what you're doing at Future Africa. Why is this the case? And can you share some of the unique challenges you have faced in fundraising and some of the things you've now done as, I suppose, innovation, or do you want to call it reverse innovation at Future Africa?
Sure. Yeah, capital is a very essential element to the development of countries. Unfortunately, for a lot of both historical and other structural reasons, Africa hasn't really been very favored in the capital marketplace globally, and to some extent has been a bit unfairly treated, and sometimes a bit justifiably ignored when it comes to global capital. But I think the first thing to think about is, what is required from a capital lens, when you think about Africa's development. And the argument we keep making is that, development aid, as well as, cutthroat private equity capital that's just purely seeking returns, are not the right capital frames for Africa. What you want is, market creating capital, specifically, innovation driven capital. What you don't want is another banker who wants to make money off transactions, or another aid worker who's going to take 80% of the money in his pocket before giving you 20% and call it development. Because the paradigms and the scale of the problems that we're trying to solve far outweigh any existing template or plan. And so there needs to be a lot of creative thinking around how you deploy capital to solve those types of problems. A practical example is the mobile phone, right? If you look at the mobile phone and its evolution, I call it the best venture capital investment in the world. You would realize that fixed line phones would probably have cost us about 10 times what it cost us to do mobile phones. And we probably spent between 10 to 20 times what we spent on mobile phone licenses trying to do that over the previous decade with state-run telecoms companies. And so as a result, we didn't succeed because it was state-run. And the moment you brought in this idea of, which was very novel for its time, distributed towers powered by generators and solar panels. You ultimately changed the game and made it possible for you to have this mobile telephony system that has now spawned other industries, from ringback tunes to mobile money, right? And is the foundation of what we call the internet today. That's the kind of capital that Africa needs. So at Future Africa, what we try to do is commoditize venture capital. We don't think it should be the exclusive preserve of people with access to DFIs and people in Silicon Valley. We think Africans know their problems better than anybody else in the world. And as a result, they could be brought together to finance the entrepreneurs that are solving those problems. And so at Future Africa, if you go on future.africa, you can apply, anybody can apply to invest in the future of our continent, and we'll send you extremely clear and lucid explanations of what these innovators are doing. It's really not rocket science. Give you an opportunity to ask them questions and allow you, with your small dollars, to participate in the wealth creation. And then, oftentimes, quite often, very soon afterwards, the venture capitalists are happy to join us so they can earn their bread. But it doesn't have to start with them, and we shouldn't give them that much power over our ability to innovate. Thank you.
I mean, I was trying to see whether I could get some of your trade secrets, but thank you for that. I think the key thing that you mentioned really is that creative thinking about how to deploy capital, and solve this problem. And again, it's market creating capital, which is something to think about and ponder about as we navigate the fundraising challenges that we have in Africa, which are not going away overnight. So thank you for that insight. I'm going to ask, should we call it the elephant in the room question when it comes to gender? And I'm going to direct that at Uche. And then once we're done with that question, we'll move into questions from the audience. From a gender perspective, there's a lot of buzz. There's been a lot of press, as well as many reports on a high level. He mentioned, DFIs, a lot of international government development organizations as well, talking about interventions, creating reports, designing programs to support African female entrepreneurs. Now, that's what we hear. But I want to ask you, as a woman in business, have you, in business, ever benefited from any of these interventions? What is the reality of accessing funding support, for example, as a woman in business in Africa?
Great question, Aramide. The truth is that this gender question it exists worldwide. If you look at the US, which is a market from the VC and investment perspective that everybody looks up to, the numbers are still not good enough. If you look at it from the perspective of even women, then you shift over to women of color. Once again, you start seeing some really tiny numbers. So there's work to be done. However, I'll take an optimistic view. Have I been able to access these programs? I would say not necessarily female-specific programs, but general programs. So, for example, Stanford Seed, my company was a part of that, and that was an amazing experience for us, and I would recommend it to other companies. What I would say is that there's work to be done, and we would have to all do it together. I will build up on what Iyin said in terms of the model that Future.Africa takes. If we're going to copy and paste the model that as is used in the West, I won't say that is going to be our endpoint. I would say an amount of innovation needs to come in. How businesses are funded and scaled in Africa, at the end of the day, could end up being different from elsewhere. I love what Future.Africa is doing. I love what Clearco, a Canadian company that just also attained unicorn status as well, just really questioning, okay, what is the model that we're going to use to fund these companies, and taking away some of those biases that exist that leads to those single figure digits when we talk about financing and investing for female entrepreneurs. For any female entrepreneurs, this data should not discourage you. However, it should encourage you that, there are opportunities that exist and there's work to be done. I happen to confidently believe in the capacity of female entrepreneurs, especially on the continent. Aramide, you work with some of them, and it is just missing that technology scale component. So many people are doing more traditional businesses that have the potential to grow really large and impactful with the right technology components and the right support. So I expect the next 5 years to be basically a revolution for female entrepreneurs on the continent and even worldwide. Somebody mentioned, it was during Mr. Bello Osage's session, I know some of you were there, and he talked about how for the new generation, it's not all about your country anymore like it was for them. Like, okay, let's start in Nigeria, maybe we'll open up in Ghana. Now it's about a global view. So I even anticipate female entrepreneurs from Africa starting ventures that quickly spread and grow all around the world.
Aramide, I'm a white male, but I'd like to say something very quick about African women entrepreneurs. In our team, out of 4 partners, 2 are African women. We would not be able to really understand what does it take to encourage a woman entrepreneur in Africa if we did not have African women in our team. So I think that is a very important prerequisite for us to play, for all of us. And so I think that part of the solution of having more African technology entrepreneurs that are female is to have more venture capitalists that are female. It's just a very small suggestion, but I think it's quite important to recognize that.
Thanks, Maurizio. That's a good point about more women as fund managers and VCs. And I think as women continue to explore, what to do, perhaps even in university and college, they need to begin to think about this path because there are huge opportunities when it comes to funding and fund management. So thank you for that. And Uche, to your point about, geography, it really brings me to the question from the audience, which I'm going to pose to Fiona. When it comes to Africa and doing business. There's a question, it says, with the language barriers and the lack of truly inclusive internet forums, how do you create those connections if you are, in, sort of missed some of the question, but it says, in, one of the African countries and trying to do business across border. I presume that's what the rest of the question says. But yeah, so with the language barriers, if you're, for example, Anglophone, how can you really be effective in your connection and doing business if you don't speak the language?
Right. So we've seen, I think, drawing from our entrepreneurs, like those we have, for example, in Kenya, who are looking then to go into Francophone Africa. I think one of the effective things that we've seen is then bringing team members who are anchored in the market and understand the market that you're trying to go into well. So probably bilingual speaking people who then can bridge that gap. And also who really understand the dynamics of the market that you're looking to expand into. I think another very interesting one is then on leveraging on networks like Endeavor that can bridge that gap for you, make the introductions for you. Board need to be strategic in terms of the markets that you're looking to go into and can help open these doors for you and have these conversations hopefully on your behalf. So yes, I think there's many creative ways that you can go around it. But I think the big one and most valuable one is then having those members of your team who are reflective of the markets that you're looking to operate in.
That's a good point. Thank you for that. That's if you have that opportunity and you're lucky enough to have that in terms of your team. Uche, how about you?
From what perspective?
So doing business cross-border, especially when you don't speak the language and you're limited in terms of, I suppose, online resources that help you to connect with entrepreneurs or businesses across border.
Yeah, it goes back to the relationships component, and it also goes back to sort of like the value you're bringing to the table. There was something Maurizio said around the magic being found in the business models, right? Really digging deep and finding those business models that just that just changed the game. So a lot of things being done traditionally, and you're coming up with something that, hey, with this business model, things can be done much more efficiently. This unlocks opportunities. This unlocks those billions of dollars that we're all searching for. That translates across barriers. When you're going to somebody with a very strong proposition, definitely that gives you an open door. Of course, leveraging relationships for introductions. We have technology thanks to things like LinkedIn. We have various communities, and I'll definitely highlight the value of communities as well when it comes to relationship building, because there's a certain trust element that comes in when you are being referred to somebody through a community as well. So those would be quite my suggested approaches. So 1, general relationships. 2, in terms of community. And 3, get your value proposition right. Get your business model on point. A business model that makes sense, whether we're speaking in Spanish, French, Italian, they're going to be interested.
Thank you for that. I definitely know the value of communities, as I am a part of one, and relationships, they're so valuable in Africa, and there's such a high value that we place on relationships and trust. So that is even more important than other metrics. And so thank you for emphasizing that again. My next question is for Maurizio. What is the most important thing that needs to happen for VC investing to continue growing in Africa? This is a question from the audience.
Yeah, I think that we need to get more capital into Africa. We need to make sure that people consider this as a very attractive region to invest. And the way to do this is by having great exits. I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. We have started to see the first unicorns. These are not random events. These are the beginning of a very consistent stream of companies that are getting out of the pipe. That started with entrepreneurs like GV, in Future Africa many years ago. And you need 10 years to build a very valuable company, right? So now we're near 11, and you see the first very valuable companies, but there's all the other cores that are coming along. So the best ways to continue to grow is to deliver great exits and to attract more capital. This is important because we need more capital at all the stages. At the very early stage, I think there's good things are happening, but Series A and B is a disaster. There's not enough capital. We need a lot more money, and we need to deliver. It's up to us. It's up to the investors, not the entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs are great. If it doesn't work, it's because of the investors, not the entrepreneurs. We have to deliver more exits, and we have to attract more teams into Africa for checks that are bigger, that are 5, 10, 20 million. And we need to encourage that. Otherwise, the Future Africa perspective is right. We don't want to be recolonized by venture capital, right? We need African teams, we need African VCs, we need African capital. And to do that, there is one way. Let's deliver great returns.
Honestly, we could have an entire panel around this when it comes to investing and raising capital and making Africa more attractive. And I'm going to ask one more fundraising question before I ask Fiona the last question with regards to the AFCFTA. This is all coming from the audience. What are the best ways to raise capital in your country or region? I'll pose that to E.
Yeah. So, there's one important piece of context I think a lot of people often miss when it comes to early stage funding in Africa, which is that we don't have friends and family that can invest in your round. So, coming straight out of even 10, 15 years working for a large institution with all the experience in the world, you might end up with, declining savings because you probably saved your money in Naira, and it's barely enough to take you home, and it's a period of great risk for you. So you're probably thinking more about how do you want to save as much money as possible to survive the long and bumpy ride that entrepreneurship can be, as opposed to invest your own money. And that's what Future Africa actually does pretty well. We write 25 to 50K checks to up to 100 companies a year, to make sure that your first check isn't a big a problem for you. And then, but I think apart from organizations like ours, I think it makes sense for you to, you can put together a very small angel round by asking smaller checks from your friends and family, even if it's $1,000, $2,000 from friends and family at good terms. Another way is to find a customer and then ask for a loan to execute against the customer's mandates, right? I think that never goes wrong. Another way is to apply to Y Combinator. We always encourage a lot of our friends to apply to Y Combinator. It's a fantastic jumpstart. Now, I can't obviously place in order. Every company is different. I can't give you more specific advice than that. But my advice would be just get a product out there, no matter how little, and you'll be shocked at what it takes to just deliver a service that shows that your idea is viable. If you think really hard, you can find out. And I think that's how you get started. Thank you.
Love that, Iyin. There's a significant running theme here, even with all the questions, really about that creative, innovative way of doing things. You can't just do things like everywhere else, because again, Africa is unique with its unique challenges. So thank you for that insight. Fundraise, even if it's on a micro level, and just put your product out there. Final question from the audience for Fiona. I'll use my phone just so I can see it better. Okay, do you view the AfCFTA, the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, as positive or negative for business? I'll say for business in general, because you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, you support a lot of entrepreneurs. And if positive, in your view, how would you suggest promoting that implementation amongst, entrepreneurs, businesses in Africa, given that the adoption phase is only just beginning?
I think really great question, and I think very timely in terms of where we're seeing a lot of our entrepreneurs who are scaling across the continent, right? So our markets have not been homogeneous. So if you're operating, for example, in Kenya and looking to go to Zambia and sort of start up afresh in the new market that you're moving into. So if there's policies that could make our borders much easier for us to move around, to then scale our businesses, to move talent around, I think is a net benefit for everybody who's operating across the continent. And so that what that means is if you're been limited to, say, a population of 40 million people in Kenya, then you have over 1 billion people across the continent who become then your addressable market. And that makes it a lot easier for you to be able to build a scalable business. And then to the second question on how we promote the implementations amongst our elected officials, I think, and it really plays to the conversation around the role of government and how entrepreneurs can then integrate into policy making. So one of the things that we really encourage our entrepreneurs, because a lot of times we're always pointing fingers at government is not doing this, not doing that. So yes, we know you're hunkering down in your businesses. There's a lot of challenges you're facing, but also you need to lend your voice to when these policies come around. And the only way that happens if you're at the center, right in front of engaging with government. And we see that at a local level, for example, when legislators come up with bills, for example, that touch on startups, in a way they're very insulated from the reality of what entrepreneurs go through. And so if the entrepreneurs don't proactively lend their voices to ensure that the legislations that are being put together are not reflective of the problems that they're trying to solve for, then you get very mismatched regulations that are in place. And so I think it's really for where we sit is really to encourage our entrepreneurs to take advantage of all these trade policies that come and to really lend their voice when they're called upon to give their opinion and to and to be able to influence it in the right direction. Yeah.
Thank you, Fiona. And I'm so glad you mentioned that point about lending your voice when it comes to policies. We've seen a lot of issues with startups in, I suppose I'll use Nigeria for example, because of policy. So you can't be immune from that. You can't work in a silo without engaging with government and those stakeholders. So thank you. I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we've almost run out of time. But I will like to really thank all our panelists. In thinking about innovation in Africa over the next decade, we've heard from I'll call them Africa experts because they've successfully navigated the African ecosystem in building their businesses or even identifying potentially successful companies to invest in. We've heard from E, who talks about mindsets. I think that's really at the core of everything. And also learning to creatively deploy capital or do anything when it comes to business. Maurizio talks about, looking at opportunities across all the verticals. It's not just payments or fintech. There are significant opportunities across sectors. And Uche talks about, leveraging relationships across border, collaboration, reaching out, leveraging the platforms and the resources even online to tap into, untapped potential and opportunities on the continent. And of course, Fiona, who talks about there's business, outside of the tech, but then you can layer that with technology. And of course, our final point about lending our voices when it comes to policy making. The central theme here is innovation is possible in Africa. It's about identifying these opportunities. We can't innovate without addressing the existing challenges. We must work in partnership with all the different entities, but it is possible and we can see that it's happening. So with that said, I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing their experiences and their learnings with us. And I'd like to thank all of you, our attendees, for participation. Thank you very much. I will be handing over to Michael now.
Wow. Thank you very much, guys. I mean, Uche, Maurizio, Iyin, Fiona, and Aramide, that was fantastic. In my business school classes, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship and starting businesses, but hearing you guys share your perspective from the trenches is just gold.